morning. How's everybody doing today? There we go. And we're going. It's go time. And we're going. Okay.
Quit being so joyful, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to thank everyone who made it out last night or joined us online for our Christmas Eve service. Most of the reports and comments have been well, and people were encouraged and fellowshipped and all those things. So thank you for being here. And I expected it to be a fairly slim crowd today due to the holidays and things like that. And I'm not saying we're busted at the seams, but those of you who have managed to come out, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to mention one or two things. There's a few bags left on the back table. Some have some trinkets and items in it, and some have some chocolate in them. And this is a chocolate one here. So get your bag on the way out. You don't have to take it home. You can try to give it to somebody. Yeah. Merry Christmas. Yeah. Unless it has Reese's, it doesn't count. Okay, well. I like Reese's, but I'm kind of an almond joy guy too. So yeah. But not Mounds. I want the almond. Yeah. So anyway, the bags are back there, and please enjoy yourself. I was talking to Ray. He's talking about handing out to one of the guys on the corner at Walmart. I was talking about driving out the back parking lot, and there was someone kind of, disheveled, sitting on the bench over there, and gave them a Christmas bag. And their eyes just light up and beam. And how many people are going to walk up and hand a person who looks a little off anything? Even a glance. Most people will pretend they're invisible. So still a chance to just participate. And again, it could be somebody, your next door neighbor, it could be anything. There's also a few leftover lovely ornaments left over from last night. They're in the basket bag back over there. And they actually have different words on them: love, faith, hope, kind of stuff like that. Anything else that needs to be announced? Well then, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Let us sing songs to the Lord.
Merry Christmas. If you're a church and you're closed on Christmas, probably a fake church. Just throwing that out there.
The first Noel, the angel did say, was to certain poor shepherds in fields as they lay, keeping their sheep on a cold winter's night that was so deep. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel. They looked up and saw a star shining in the east beyond them far, and to the earth it gave great light, and so it continued both day and night. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel. And by the light of that same star, 3 wise men came from country far to seek for a king was their intent, and to follow the star wherever it went. Noel, 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 born is the King of stay right o'er the place where Jesus lay. Noel, 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 Noel. Born is the King of Israel. Noel, 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 Noel. Born is the King of Israel. Please have a seat.
This is a time of year that there are people who are just ecstatic with Christmas always, and there are a lot of us who have issues that we have to take care of, but I'm holding the microphone, so I'm going to tell you a praise that we had. We have a family member who is just in need, needs a lot of help. And so we sat down and we tried to think out how could we cut back on this, and this to be able to send money. And we got it down to, we'd start with $200 a month and prayer, lots of prayer around the 200. And we got our things from Social Security in the mail. And between the two of us, we are drawing $240 a month more than we were. We have the $200 to send to our loved one. We have $40 extra. I'll find some place to put it if I don't give Dawn all of it for Burger King. But God just continues to bless us. And I've been talking to a lot of you. Sometimes we have all of this pain and suffering, but boy, there's moments when the light shines in. Bow your heads with me. Oh, happy birthday, Jesus. Thank you that you're always there for us. Thank you that we have this opportunity to come together. And Lord, it was good for me to walk in this morning and see all of these people that I love so much and that I know love you because we are a family. I pray that today we will all make contact with those we can, those we must, and pray for those who we couldn't make contact with, that you would be blessed in everything we say and do, and that we would never forget that you are the reason for the season. We love you, Lord. Amen.
If you like, please stand with us.
What child is this who lay to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping. This is Christ. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh, come peasant king to own him, the King of kings, salvation brings. Let loving hearts enthrone him. This is Christ, the King whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him forth, the babe, the Son of Mary. The babe, the Son of Mary. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The Lord has promised good to me, His word my hope secure. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow, the sun forbear to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine, will be forever mine. You are forever mine.
Merry Christmas.
Time for a random bonus trivia question. In the Old Testament, what book comes after Jonah? Don't look it up. It's from your memory and your advanced Bible studies. What book comes after Jonah? If no one answers it, there was a big prize riding on it. If you answer, then there was actually a lesser prize. No? Oh, you are close. Nahum, are you thinking Nahum? Yes, I don't know where Nehemiah. Okay, well, Nehemiah is in the, but the Joby areas. But Nahum is actually after. So Jonah, one book later, Nahum, and it is the book of Micah, the book of Micah. And of course, there was big dollars riding on that one. So I guess, yeah. Nobody wins the extravagant, expensive gifts, plural, this time. Micah. And when Christmas time rolls around and people put up the verses on little plaques and things, what do we got? We got one over here. What's that one? That one's Holy Night. We talked last week about some Isaiah passages that come up a lot during Christmas. Well, in Micah, there's one that comes up a lot around Christmas time. To explain the book of Micah, the book of Micah is a prophetic oracle. The prophet Micah wrote it 742 to 686 BC, shortly before the northern kingdom's fall in 722 BC. Key personalities are all the people of Samaria and Jerusalem. The purpose of the book of Micah was to proclaim warning and judgment to both the northern and southern kingdoms. And the purpose of a lot of those books is to proclaim warning and judgments on different folks. His message was similar to that of Isaiah and was written about the same time as Isaiah. Micah described the impending judgment that would eventually exile the nation. So now, we talked about this before, but I want to show it again. When you read through Old Testament prophecy, you can tell that if you're reading along and it's talking about doom or gloom or judgment or whatever, but then there'll be a part in the text where it just switches. It starts talking about a future event. It starts talking about something coming. And you put all these together, these are all references and prophecies concerning the coming Messiah. Coming Messiah. And this one's no different. So it starts off, and look at verse 1, Micah chapter 5, verse 1. But you, marshal your troops now, city of troops, for the siege is laid against us. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. And of course, we know the northern kingdom of Israel was going to be in rough shape pretty soon as the Assyrians came by and took it over. Judah, the southern kingdom, didn't fall for some time later to the Babylonian time. But the Assyrians came down and took over all sorts of things. Naming and claiming on their march to glory. It says, marshal your troops. Now let's read this just kind of as a person reading literature, just trying to figure out what it's talking about. Here it's saying, marshal your troops now, city of troops for a siege. Well, that means, and of course, old cities had walls around them, which was a good thing. It kept the bad guys out, kept the right people in. If, an invading horde came, you could get in your city and hide for a while. And it actually worked pretty well in some situations where that invading horde, the Mongols, what have you, if everyone hid and took all the possessions with them, there wasn't much food or livestock for them to live upon with their massive armies. And that by itself was enough to thin the herd and protect. So a wall is a good thing. Wall's also a bad thing. Depending on how big the army is and how long they stay outside the walls, it's now a prison. You're now in a prison. And there's horrible stories that take place as people are locked up inside the city and food is short and all these different things. But it says here, marshal your troops now, city of troops, for a siege is laid against us. And then it says, they will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. Israel's ruler, the king, would be a common thought here, and being hit with a rod, which means the bad guys are close enough to do that. Sounds like your city just got took over. That's what I'm guessing. If I'm trying to read this just as a person trying to read some literature, that's what this is talking about. Clearly, there's passages that point towards Christ. Then there's a thing where people see Christ in passages that don't necessarily point towards him. This would be one. The ruler of Israel will be struck on the cheek with a rod. Take out the whole first part of the verse about the siege and Jerusalem, Jesus, when he was on trial, he was struck with a rod. He's the true King of Kings. This must be talking about him. No, I think as we read through the context, he comes up, But this is actually talking about the ruler of Israel at the time when the siege takes place and the king. I just throw that out there because I run across a lot of people who like to see Jesus in just about everything. And I'm not so sure there isn't some aspect of him, his kindness, his goodness, his forgiveness, his judgments, in every verse. Those things are part of who Christ is. But not necessarily talking about Jesus. We'll explain later. Because then it says in verse 2, but. So this is happening, but. Here's that change now. You, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come one for me, one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. So now this very clearly, again, trying to read it as just as kind of literal as you can. But you, Bethlehem, we've heard of Bethlehem, oh little town. It says that you are small among the clans of Judah, southern kingdom. You know, it's what's 4 miles south or so of Jerusalem. Out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Now this is talking about a coming king, spoiler alert, Jesus. Not the first passage, which was talking about the ruler being hit on the rod. That was the siege. Though, again, Jesus could fit into that. I'm trying to... Then it says, they're small. And there are those times where, many a political leader today graduated a college of renown, holds degrees in law or whatever else. They're not just Joe Schmo, from... And it says they're small. They're at this time. We're talking 800 years, 700 years before the time of Christ. It's believed to have been written. So he's saying, Bethlehem, you are small. Yeah, my guess is they're small. We're going back. They're small. Fernley, what did it look like 100 years ago? It was small. Wasn't hardly even here. In fact, when did Canal Township start? 30s? 1930s? Don't quote me on that. But it's not, Fernley is not that old. It's because the canal went through that kind of helped. It says you are small. And of course, we're talking about leaders today, dictators, whatever else. Most of them don't always come from the most obscure village. They come from, like I said, a big city around a thing. They've been through the military, up through the ranks. They hold a position, a title. You just don't say that, hey, the next president of the United States is going to come from Hazen. Really? I mean, that just kind of sounds weird, doesn't it? Doesn't this kind of sound weird? It turns out the next great leader of America will be from Wabuska. Now, people in the room probably don't know the places I'm talking. Some of the people here don't know what I'm talking about. Most do. And for anyone at home or online, there's a little bitty, what's left of a town down the highway a couple of miles, which was Hazen. And the actual part nearest the highway is less than it used to be. In fact, there used to be a railroad tie yard there, and that didn't make it this year. It went up in smoke. So there's even, but there's even less there right now than there was 6 months ago, give or take, whatever it was. Huh? Okay. But yeah, so it's dwindling, it's not looking good this year, not looking good. And to say that out of that is going to come a great leader, well, that's what this is saying. Why does God do things like that? I think it's just to show he's God. I can do things that you don't think are going to happen. I can do things in ways you don't think they should happen. And what does it prove? I'm God and you're not. And that's an important and incredible message for us to learn. In fact, it makes life much easier when you figure that one out. Now think about this. You don't have a God. There's no great scheme. It's just you fighting your way through life. Well, that means when bad times come, there's only one person to turn to, you. And you're the one experiencing the bad times, so you're not much fun to be with. You can see this could lead to all sorts of mental anguish in a loop of just looking at the bad things and feeling bad, and looking at the bad things and feeling bad, and looking at the bad things and feeling bad. Despair, loss of hope. God has a habit of reminding us who's in charge. And if you get that figured out, most Christians would agree, life seems to go smoother. You put him in the right place, you get yourself in the right place. I'm not saying without trouble, without problems, but even the trouble and the problems, you work through them. They're not as devastating as they once were. Because God is God. He's in control. He can take care of business. And in this passage, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. How many? One. It's talking about a singular individual. I said, even if you're a non-Christian, a non-scholar, a non-theologian, and you're reading this, you still have to come to the conclusion, well, this is talk about somebody showing up and changing things. It's going to be a rule over it. And it even goes on to say, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. He goes way back, way back. And there is a certain, pedigree, if that's the word for it. Some people like to trace their genealogies, and I'm not totally against it. I've learned more about my family history over the last few years. But there's a part where, just because your third cousin on your father's side was related to the Secretary of State, doesn't mean much for you. You know what I mean? President's not going to come by and just check on it to see how you're doing. Not going to happen, Some people like that stuff, 27 grandfathers ago, some famous king was, and that's nice, that's cute. I think it's interesting. I wouldn't say you can't do it, but I wouldn't put a lot of hope in it. But some people, there is a pedigree, there is a lineage. Certainly when it comes to royalty, whose father was who and where you came from has a lot to do with it. You're certainly not going to see a Hazen guy pop up as next king of England, just not going to happen, generally speaking. And so here is this one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Now, Jesus is a descendant of David. The Gospels, Matthew, go through a great deal of genealogy to prove he is in the line of King David. And there's verses that talk about King David's heirs, his lineage, will rule forever. And here is, not everyone reading this would understand that. You have to kind of, hindsight's 20/20, a Christian perspective, looking back on the scripture, you see Jesus. But whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Well, certainly his lineage, being from a descendant of David, going way, way back, and back before that, would be that. However, and this is something an average reader wouldn't get, when we're talking about Jesus, his origins go way, 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 way back. For instance, Luke chapter 10, I'll just read it to you. The 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. He had sent out these 72 disciples to heal and preach the word and let everybody know what's going on. They came back and they were overwhelmed with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. Verse 18, Luke 10, he replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Now think about what just happened there. They're saying, we're out there, there's things going on, there's demon-possessed people. Side note, depending on where you live and where you go, many of us do not have a problem believing that some people are still demon-possessed. Now, I've seen extreme views of this. You're trying to get rid of chocolate out of your life, you need to pray against the chocolate demon. I'm not making that up. I've seen it happen, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those of us who work downtown in the alleys. I do not have a problem believing some people are demon-possessed. One bit. I remember one time I was on the back of my truck waiting for some casino to open up. I was getting the food prepared, and some guy comes staggering down he'd had a long night or a long life or year or whatever it was. He's staggering down the sidewalk, mumbling to himself. He gets within about 10 feet of me, starts blaspheming the name of the Lord Jesus with the most disgusting phrases you could imagine about mothers and things and, all these different things. He very clear, very loud. About 5 feet past me, he stops and goes back to mumbling. Chills ran down my spine. I've been downtown a lot. Hadn't seen too much of that. I remember my niece who was in law enforcement worked in the jail and said, oh yeah, there are people who are demon-possessed. She's not based on some Christian, she's based on real life experience. Well, here, even the demons are submitting to them. But then he says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. How long ago was that? How far back does that go? And he says he saw it. He's also saying, you think the demons are obeying. I've seen Satan fall. We've been around long enough to see even bigger things happen. And he says, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions excuse me, and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. Verse 20. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. A powerful verse and one to remember so you don't get too uppity. Look at me go, look at me go. I think many a pastor of a booming church could learn from that one. And the reason I say that, first, I'm safe. This isn't a booming church. Next, I've seen over the last several years, some people really gain a lot of steam, work their way up. They get a lot of YouTube things and clips, and I won't name names, but pretty soon they fall for one reason or another. Sometimes sexuality stuff, sometimes it's too big for their britches and the church fires them. All these things happen. It'd be good to learn that, even if you're doing great for God and things are changing, and, in this case it was demons, but remember your name's written in the book of life. That's the important part, not how great you're doing out there in the countryside. Then Jesus also talks, an interesting claim about himself. John chapter 8, Jesus says this. The Jews answered him, aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed? The Jews are telling him, you are Samaritan. That's a four-letter word. Yeah, it was a four-letter word. Samaritans were half-breeds. You'll see it in the Bible in a few places. They were considered half-breeds. They worshipped on the wrong hill. They had an altered form of their worship practices. And in the Bible, they pop up a few times. There's the story of the Good Samaritan. What makes that story very powerful, besides the fact that the guy was willing to help a person in trouble, is he was the least likely candidate in their society. Remember the Levite came by and the priest came by and they all saw the guy in trouble and walked around him. Still happens to this day. Again, working downtown, I've seen people stumble and fall and scatter all over the sidewalk, and people just walk around them. Still happens. And the most unlikely candidate, the Samaritan, comes along and has pity on the guy and tries to help him and care for him. And what makes that story more powerful is he's a Samaritan, considered less worthy. And in the story, he's the hero. Another lesson there, God uses the most unlikely candidates. To me, that's hope. That's hope for me. That's hope for everybody. You may consider yourself to be unlikely, not worthy, insignificant. You're in a perfect position for God to use you. Well, you've got two words against him. A, you're a Samaritan, and demon-possessed. If the first one wasn't bad enough, right? They're saying he is a Samaritan and demon-possessed. Jesus replies in verse 49, I'm not possessed by a demon, said Jesus, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I'm not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Verily, verily, I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death. Now here he's elevating, his teachings, because the Father is with him. Then do you think they like to hear this kind of talk? No, not too much. Because in verse 52, at this they exclaim, now we know that you are demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets, that you say whoever obeys your word will never taste death. Here's the patriarchs, these heroes of the Jewish faith. They eventually died, And if we listen to you, we're not going to die. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are? Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, who you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. And if I said I did not, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him and obey his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and he was glad. Seeing Jesus' day. Father Abraham, way back, is rejoicing to see Jesus' day, the appearance of the Messiah. Then they answer in verse 57, you are not 50 years old, they said. How have you seen Abraham? Very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. Hey, what's going on here? One moment, please. Before Abraham was was born, I am. And there's a whole interesting study on that word, I am. Right? Because, Moses says, hey, you want me to go into Egypt and let the Israelites go? Who am I going to tell them sent me? Tell them I am that I am. That phrase, I am. And some people, there's a whole study on how Jesus uses this word and says, I am, kind of parallel and mirroring that I am from the Old Testament. I don't want to go there today, but at this, they picked up stones to stone him. Yeah, they liked what he had to say. But Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple crowds. Yeah, his origins are from ancient times. Check. Verse 3 of Micah 5. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. Therefore Israelite will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son. So again, even just kind of going through this as a matter of fact, reading the words, sounds like there's going to be a bad time, a time of abandonment. How long that period is, we don't know, but there's going to be a time. And it changes when she who is in labor bears a son. Now it's narrowing it down. Something changes when she who is in labor has a kid, not just any sex, but a kid who happens to be a son. Now, I would think, we went from just reading this, just kind of reading the words without a great deal of Christian knowledge. But I would even think now at this point, even a non-church goer who has an idea of Christianity could actually start going, hey, wait a minute. Gal has to have a son starts changing everything. That sounds familiar. They might start putting there's manger scenes about this kind of thing going on. And it even says, and the rest of his brothers returned to join Israel. Well, of course, he went to collect Israel. Real people wanted to worship the real God. Some of the religious elites of the day, while very religious, were not worshiping God. We know that because they tried to kill the Messiah. Chances are there's something askew in their thinking. They're thinking they're doing God a favor by killing his son. And it says the rest of his brothers returned to him. Well, that could be the Israelites he gathered up. That could be his own brothers. It also works because there was a time when his own brothers didn't realize he was the Messiah and then caught on. James and Jude pop up in the Bible, half-brothers of Jesus. So it certainly works on multiple levels. Then it says in verse 4, he will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Well, now, if he was a military dictator type of thing, it might say something like, his command will marshal the troops, he will mow over people, he take some names and claim some territory, he'll make Alexander the Great or Napoleon look like small potato, right? If we're talking about a military leader, you use words like military words. Their campaign, they're here it says shepherd his flock. What kind of person is also known as a shepherd of the flock? And how does he do it? In the strength of the Lord. The Lord's behind it. The Lord's in it. The Lord's through it. The Lord promotes it. In the majesty of the name of the Lord, his God. Back to a singular person. Shepherd says his God. I said a lot of times you just see verse 2 quoted on a plaque. Bethlehem stuff, which works. But there's so much more to it. It's taking place right here in these verses before our eyes, talking about a future event. And they will live securely, for his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. The final part of verse 4. And they will live securely. Well, now, a person reading this who doesn't know much could actually look back, and I wouldn't even argue with him. You could look at human history and say to yourself, there isn't much security. There isn't much peace. There isn't much safety in this world. And it's only a matter of time before our news channels will switch to the next major conflict. And our news channels will forget about the last major conflict. Think about that. Right now it's Ukraine, it's Russia, it's Ukraine, it's Russia. But it wasn't that long ago. It was North Korea is doing this and North Korea is doing that. And watch out, here comes North Korea. Don't even hear about it much anymore, do we? They closed down for a while? What happened there? They just start being nice? Is that what happened? Was that what happened? I don't know. We watched as a Burmese army overtook the government. Don't hear much about that. Everything went well in Afghanistan, I assume. Is that what happened? I don't see it on the news. So there must not be any murder, bloodshed, nothing going on over there. Anytime a country pulls out and lets the country to itself, it always works out well, right? No, never. History does not show this. Unless there's a great deal of structure put in place before you break off into splinter groups, everybody vying for power. I don't care if it's a country or a small business with 2 vice presidents. These things happen. Once the major leader, once the things are changed, it's a free-for-all. It's a free-for-all. And apparently not in Afghanistan. Haven't heard too much about it. So I guess death tolls aren't rising, or American collaborators aren't being tortured or killed, which you'd assume would happen. You'd assume. But I'm not seeing. You might watch better news than I do. I'm just not seeing a lot about it. In fact, if you want to mark my words, if this is a trend, which it is, there will come a time within a short amount of time where Russia and Ukraine are no longer in the news, and it's the next conflict. Just prepare yourself for it. Middle East usually erupts once a year, somewhere over there. I don't mean that to be flippant. About once every other year, some country in that vicinity is shooting at someone else. It just seems to be a reoccurring pattern. When it says they will live securely, kind of hard to apply that to world history. So that would be a little harder for the average reader to grab. When is this period of security going to take place? However, and while we wouldn't call Israel the most secure place in the world, modern-day Israel, we still seem amazing. How many missiles did they shoot at them this last little bit? And most of them blown out of the sky, one after the other. One or two did fall. Very few did any major damage. It was a little. I'm not saying it wasn't. But that's some security right there. You know what I'm saying? If we want to just look at it in a modern sense. But from a Christian sense, Jesus comes into your life. He wants to guide you, help you, direct you, care for you. That shepherd and sheep thing. When that happens, there is security. There is security knowing, there's some bullies walking down the street. Does it change everything if your dad's standing in the yard right behind you? Right? It doesn't change the fact that there's bullies, right? But it does change the fact that you just might not get messed with as much because your dad's standing there. Well, Christians will tell you time and time again, there have been hard times and ups and downs, and Jesus was with me through every one of them. We made it through it. Sometimes I didn't know how we would. Sometimes there seemed to be just when we couldn't take anymore, another hit came, and Jesus got us through all of that. And prayer and fellowship of saints who've gone through the exact same things. It helped us get through those difficult times. And what happens when you do this? Peace. You get peace in this crazy world when all these things are taking place. I told you one of the most greatest things you can ever learn is you're not alone. You're not alone when you lose a loved one. People in this room, many of them. You're not alone to struggle with addiction. You're not alone to struggle with insignificant feelings and do I matter, do I care? Well, I don't know if you care to everybody else, but God certainly cares for you. Jesus does. This church will try, I'm sure, should you walk in the doors. There is security, but just not the kind you might think about. And Christians have testified to this. And then it says, for then, again, a past, even a future, more future event, then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. Has Jesus' name reached to the ends of the earth? Is his kingdom, seen in some countries, not as much as others, but his kingdom is still rolling along, still moving, still doing things. And it's funny to say that about any, if we were to say some country, you may not even know where it, couldn't find it on a map. We'll say, let's say Malawi. Malawi's going to take over the entire continent, and eventually its reign will be from end to end of the earth. Really? I didn't know that. It could happen, I guess, but never known them to be big global movers before, shakers. Estonia, Estonia is going to take. I think Estonians are great people. If you even know where that's at, over there by Finland, but these are insignificant countries. There were countries that were movers and shakers. And we talked about the Assyrians taking names. We talked about, of course, you read about the Greeks clearly taking us. The Babylonians came through, then the Greeks, then the Romans. All these people groups came through. They did large things. But here is a country not known for its fantastic army, seeing how it gets taken over fairly often and all the cities destroyed and everything else. Never known for a great navy. And we look back in our own history, we could say, well, clearly Britain had a navy that did some stuff. Spaniards had a navy, did some stuff. Portuguese had a navy, did some stuff, Even the Dutch, for a while, were moving along, doing some stuff with their navies and what have you. Impressive. And colonizing and getting out and trade all over the place. You could say all these things about those countries. But you're not going to, that just isn't going to come up in many a sub-Saharan country. They're not going to be the world movers. Could happen someday, but, it just doesn't seem likely. And here, from a less likely candidate, that this leader's greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. And Christians know it happened. It happened. It happened to each and every one of us when we found his greatness in our lives, his presence. It happens again when we know that friends and family and lovers come to know the Lord. And it continues to spread to the ends of the earth. Well, we looked at the verses in Isaiah. We looked at Micah. Come Easter, we look at prophecies in the 22nd Psalm concerning the crucifixion. All these things pointing towards what Jesus will do when he gets here. Think about that. It actually brings up stuff like the coming of Christ is mentioned in all sorts of prophecies. His birth. We've already read some about a woman having a child in more than one passage. That's the key in Isaiah and in Micah. His suffering is mentioned in the Old Testament passages. His death and his return. So, I guess the biggest point here is if you look at these passages, and you can see them pointing towards Christ, and it happened. Then you can look at stuff in the New Testament. The promises of hope, the promises of peace, the promise that someday the Lord will make the earth right. And you can have a fairly, to me, a logical faith. Well, if he said all those things back then and they did happen, then all the things the Lord has said will happen. That leads to faith, that leads to hope, that leads to trust, and that leads to peace in this life. Will you pray with me? Gracious Lord, I ask you to be with each and every person here, that in the holidays there is peace. Peace in knowing that you're in charge. Peace in knowing that you guide our lives. Peace in knowing we're not alone. The Holy Spirit is next to us. May we leave here this day refreshed, encouraged in a time when many are discouraged. Thank you for that, dear Lord. Amen. Don't forget again to take a bag or a chocolate from the bags back there. Take them home to yourself or pass them out. You are dismissed.